The rancher saved her from a ruthless gang, and the Apache woman declared, "You're my husband now." The sun rose slowly over the vast stretches of the ranch, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry grass and freshly turned earth. The rancher, a man in his early 40s, stood at the edge of his land, looking out at the wide open fields where his cattle grazed peacefully. He had lived in this region for most of his life, learning from his father and grandfather how to care for the land, the animals, and the people around him. There was something calming in the rhythm of ranch life, the quiet sound of cattle moving, the occasional clatter of hooves against the wooden fences, and the gentle hum of the wind passing through the trees. He wore worn-out boots, dusty from long hours on the land, and a hat that had seen many summers. His hands were rough and strong, evidence of years spent working under the sun, repairing fences, feeding animals, and plowing fields. Yet there was a softness in his eyes, a kind of wisdom that came from living close to nature and respecting its patterns. People in the nearby town knew him as dependable and honest, a man who would offer help without asking for anything in return. He didn't seek recognition, but everyone understood his presence brought a sense of safety. On this particular morning, the rancher moved with purpose. He had a routine, a rhythm he followed like clockwork. First, he would check the fences to ensure the cattle stayed within safe boundaries. Next, he would feed the horses and inspect the barns to make sure the equipment was in order. These small responsibilities connected him to the land, but also gave him time to think, to enjoy the quiet moments before the world became busy. As he walked along the edge of the field, he noticed the tracks of a horse, fresh in the dust. They were not his cattle's or any regular traveler's. He frowned slightly, curiosity sparking in his mind. In this region, tracks could mean strangers passing through or trouble waiting quietly nearby. Not far from the ranch, hidden among the shadows of the trees, was a woman. She was an Apache woman, strong and independent, yet the look in her eyes betrayed weariness. She had been traveling alone, moving through the region for reasons known only to her. Her clothing was practical, worn from long journeys, and her boots were dusty like the rancher's. She moved with careful steps, aware of every sound in the environment. She was no stranger to the hardships of life. Her people had taught her how to survive, how to trust her instincts, and how to remain alert even in moments that seemed calm. But even someone as skilled as she was could not always predict the dangers ahead. The woman paused by a stream, crouching to drink the clear water, and then ran her hand through her hair. Her eyes scanned the horizon constantly, a habit developed from years of living in unpredictable lands. She was strong, brave, and wise, but in this moment, a sense of unease lingered in the air. She was aware of the stories about a ruthless gang that had been roaming the nearby territories. Travelers had reported being harassed, and small villages had faced attacks. Though the woman was capable of defending herself, she knew that sometimes courage alone was not enough. The wind carried distant sounds, an unusual rustle among the trees, and her heart began to beat a little faster. Meanwhile, the rancher continued his work. He fixed a broken fence post with steady hands, using nails and hammer with expertise learned over years. As he worked, he noticed other small signs, broken branches, disturbed soil, and a faint scent of smoke from afar. His instincts, honed by a life spent outdoors, told him something was off. He paused, standing silently and listening. The wind carried whispers of movement through the grass, almost imperceptible, but enough to alert him that someone, or something, was nearby. Back by the stream, the Apache woman finished drinking water and glanced toward the horizon, sensing eyes watching her. She felt a flicker of fear but did not panic. Instead, she adjusted her pace, moving carefully, aware that danger could approach at any moment. She was cautious, but not afraid to take action when necessary. This balance of alertness and calm was part of her survival instinct, something deeply ingrained from childhood. The rancher, observing from a distance, saw her briefly and felt a twinge of curiosity. There was something in her posture, confident yet cautious, that told him she was not a stranger to hardship. The morning continued with the rancher tending to his duties, occasionally glancing toward the distant trees, feeling a sense of tension he couldn't quite explain. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the land itself was warning him of an approaching challenge. He continued working methodically, feeding the horses and making sure all the animals were safe. Yet, the feeling in his chest grew stronger, a mixture of unease and alertness. Something was coming, and he could sense it, though he didn't yet know what. The woman moved quietly through the tall grass, keeping herself low and observing everything around her. She was alert to the sounds of birds, the wind, and the distant rustle of movement. Despite the rising tension, she felt a strange sense of determination. She had faced difficulties before, harsh winters, scarce food, and treacherous terrain, but she had always found a way to endure. The rancher, from his position on the land, noticed a flicker of movement. He squinted toward the distance, and for a moment their eyes met. In that instant, there was a silent acknowledgement of awareness, a brief connection between two people who understood the dangers of their surroundings. Time seemed to slow as the rancher watched. He continued his tasks, but his mind was alert, calculating possibilities. The tracks he had noticed earlier were growing more numerous, and the signs of movement suggested that someone was following a deliberate path. He tightened his grip on his tools, feeling the weight of responsibility not just for his land and animals, but perhaps for the safety of those passing through. The Apache woman, sensing movement behind her, picked up her pace, knowing instinctively that she needed to stay ahead of any potential threat. By midday, the rancher had completed most of his chores, but he could not shake the feeling that the morning's calm was only temporary. The cattle grazed quietly, oblivious to the growing tension, while the wind carried subtle sounds that only someone with experience could detect. He paused to survey the land, and his eyes fell on the distant line of trees where the woman had been moving. He noticed her silhouette against the sunlight, moving cautiously but deliberately. In that moment, he understood that she might be in danger, and a sense of purpose filled him. He was not one to ignore trouble when he could prevent it, especially when someone's life could be at risk. The woman, now deeper into the brush, felt the world shift slightly around her. The wind seemed to change direction, carrying with it scents and sounds that made her instincts flare. She knew she could not remain in one place for long. Every step required attention, every movement demanded careful calculation. She was aware of the land, the wind, and the potential for hidden threats. Yet there was also an unspoken sense of hope. Something in the vast openness reminded her that not all was against her. There were people like the rancher, individuals who respected the land and its travelers, who could offer help when needed. As the sun climbed higher, the rancher prepared for the day's final tasks. He mended a gate, checked water troughs, and ensured that the barns were secure. Yet his thoughts repeatedly returned to the tracks and the fleeting figure he had seen. There was an unshakable feeling that the day would not pass without incident, and he steeled himself for whatever might come. The Apache woman continued to move, her steps deliberate, her senses sharp, and her mind alert to every possibility. She did not yet know that fate had placed her on a path that would cross with someone capable of offering protection in ways she had not anticipated. As the afternoon light bathed the ranch in a warm glow, the stage was set. The rancher's awareness and experience prepared him for the unexpected, while the woman's courage and instincts kept her moving forward. The land, the animals, and the quiet rhythm of life all seemed to pause, holding their breath as the first signs of danger began to appear in the distance. Neither the rancher nor the woman fully understood what awaited them, but the connection, brief and almost imperceptible, between them had already been made. In that vast, open space, a story was quietly beginning, one that would test courage, resilience, and the bonds that could form under extraordinary circumstances. The rancher, watching the distant horizon, tightened his belt and adjusted his hat. He knew that peace was fragile, and that the safety of those around him, including the unknown traveler, might soon depend on his actions. The Apache woman moved steadily, aware of every detail in her environment, ready to respond to whatever challenges emerged. The land stretched endlessly between them, but destiny had already started weaving their paths together, setting the stage for events that neither of them could yet imagine. The day moved forward slowly, each moment charged with anticipation. Every sound, the chirping of birds, the swaying of trees, the distant clatter of hooves, hinted at the coming storm. Both the rancher and the woman were aware in their own ways that something extraordinary was about to unfold. The calm of the morning was fading, replaced by the tension of approaching danger. And yet, beneath it all, a quiet sense of readiness lingered, a readiness that would soon be tested in ways neither could predict. The sun was higher now, beating down on the dusty land and casting long shadows across the ranch. The morning's calm had disappeared, replaced by a strange tension that seemed to ripple through the trees and grass. The Apache woman moved cautiously along a narrow trail, her eyes scanning every movement. She could feel the wind shifting, carrying faint sounds that made her instincts flare. She had traveled many miles alone before, but there was something in the air that told her this journey would not be ordinary. Suddenly, a group of men appeared ahead. Their clothing was rough and worn, their faces hardened by a life of crime. This was the gang that had been terrorizing travelers and nearby settlements for weeks. The woman froze for a moment, assessing the danger. She had expected some obstacles, but she had not anticipated facing so many at once. The men surrounded her, blocking the trail with a calculated presence, leaving her with no easy way to escape. Her heart beat faster, but she forced herself to remain calm. Panic could only make things worse. The leader of the gang stepped forward, a tall man with a cruel smile that barely concealed the threat in his eyes. He spoke roughly, demanding her supplies and any valuables she carried. The woman held her ground, her gaze steady, refusing to show fear. She had survived in the wild, learned to hunt, track, and defend herself. But this was different. There were too many of them, and their intentions were clear. The wind carried their harsh laughter, and for the first time in a long while, she realized she was facing a real threat to her life. Despite her skills, the gang overpowered her. They grabbed her arms, and in the struggle, she tried to kick and resist, but it was useless against so many. They forced her into a rough cart, tied her hands, and began moving along the trail in the direction of a hidden camp they used as their base. She fought against them as much as she could, but the distance between her and safety widened with every step. Her mind raced, thinking of ways to escape, to hide, to signal for help. But the reality was harsh. She was now in the hands of ruthless men who had no intention of letting her go. Back at the ranch, the rancher noticed unusual signs in the fields. Broken twigs, displaced rocks, and the faint sound of hooves on hard ground caught his attention. He squinted against the bright sunlight, sensing that someone was in trouble. Years of experience had trained him to notice the smallest details in the environment. He paused, his hands gripping the fence post, and scanned the horizon. In the distance, he saw movement that did not belong to the cattle or any usual traveler. His heart tightened with concern. Something was happening, and he felt a sudden responsibility stir in him. Without hesitation, the rancher mounted his horse. He had faced danger before, wild animals, storms, and occasional conflicts with other humans, but this felt different. The sense of urgency in the air was unmistakable. He adjusted his hat, gripping the reins firmly, and rode toward the trail where he had seen signs of disturbance. The wind carried faint sounds of struggle, the harsh voices of men, and the movement of someone being forced along the path. He urged his horse forward, the animal sensing the seriousness of the moment. The Apache woman struggled against her bindings in the cart, her eyes scanning for any chance to escape. She had noticed a narrow patch of trees on one side of the trail, where the gang's attention was momentarily distracted. If she could reach that cover, she might have a small chance to hide. She shifted her weight subtly, testing the ropes and preparing for a moment when she could act. Each second felt heavy, but she refused to give in to despair. Her mind, trained by years of survival, searched for every possible opening, every tiny advantage. Meanwhile, the rancher closed the distance. From afar, he saw the rough cart and the men surrounding it. His jaw tightened as he assessed the situation. There were too many to confront head-on with brute force, but he had something they did not: knowledge of the land and quick thinking. He guided his horse carefully, using the cover of trees and rocks to approach silently. Every step required precision. One wrong move could endanger the woman further. His focus was absolute. As the gang moved through the trail, one man distracted the others by cracking a whip to keep the horses in line. The woman noticed the slight pause and used it to her advantage. She tugged at the ropes, testing their strength. Her fingers scraped against the coarse fibers, and she began working the knots slowly, hoping that with patience she could free herself. The rancher, observing from a distance, noticed her subtle movements. He realized she was clever and resourceful, and he understood that any intervention must be calculated. The leader of the gang stopped periodically, glancing around and barking orders. He had no idea that danger was approaching from the edge of the trees. The rancher planned his next move carefully, knowing he needed to create a distraction to divide their attention. He dismounted quietly, leaving the horse behind a rock for cover. Picking up a small stone, he aimed for a pile of dry branches and threw it. The branches cracked loudly as they broke, drawing the gang's eyes momentarily away from the cart. It was just enough. The woman, sensing the distraction, continued to work on the ropes. Her fingers moved quickly, skillfully loosening the knots while the gang focused on the noise. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her mind clear. She could feel the tension in the air like a storm about to break. The rancher, moving closer, positioned himself behind a tree, watching the gang and waiting for the right moment to act. He was careful, deliberate, and ready to intervene at exactly the right instant. Finally, he saw his chance. One of the gang members had stepped away slightly, leaving the cart less protected. With quick, decisive action, the rancher moved forward, using his knowledge of leverage and surprise. He grabbed a long stick and struck the ground near the man's feet, causing him to stumble. The other gang members turned, startled, and that moment of confusion was enough for the woman to free one hand from the rope. She seized the opportunity immediately. With a swift motion, she untied the remaining ropes and leaped from the cart. The gang shouted in anger, realizing too late that their captive was no longer defenseless. She ran toward the cover of trees, her movements swift and precise. The rancher followed, intercepting the nearest gang member with a calculated strike that sent him tumbling backward. The other men hesitated, unsure how to react. The rancher and the woman worked instinctively together, moving through the terrain with a combination of skill, courage, and quick thinking. The woman's knowledge of the environment allowed her to navigate obstacles efficiently, while the rancher's strength and strategy gave them an advantage. The gang attempted to regroup, but the surprise and coordination of the rescuers created confusion. The wind carried the sounds of shouting, hoofbeats, and snapping branches as the confrontation reached its peak. Finally, after a tense chase through the brush, the gang realized they could not overpower the pair. They retreated, disappearing into the distance, leaving the woman and the rancher standing among the trees, breathing heavily but safe. The woman's chest rose and fell as she caught her breath. Her eyes, wide with adrenaline, met the rancher's gaze. For a long moment neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. Gratitude, relief, and admiration were conveyed silently through their expressions. The rancher finally stepped forward, offering a hand to steady her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. His voice was calm but carried authority, reassuring her that she was safe now. She nodded, still catching her breath, and took his hand. "Yes," she said softly. "Thanks to you." They moved away from the trail, deeper into the cover of trees, ensuring the gang could not follow. The woman's hands shook slightly as she wiped sweat and dust from her face. She looked at the rancher with a mixture of admiration and quiet wonder. This man, a stranger yet brave and skilled, had risked himself to save her from certain danger. She had never expected to encounter such courage, and yet here he was, calm in the aftermath, surveying the land as if nothing had happened. For the rancher, it was not heroism but instinct and responsibility. He had seen danger before and understood that the right action could make all the difference. But as he observed the woman, he realized she was more than just a traveler in need. She was intelligent, strong, and resilient. Their brief but intense interaction had created a bond, silent yet undeniable, formed in the crucible of shared danger. As they settled under the shade of a large tree, catching their breath and regaining composure, the woman glanced at the rancher with curiosity and respect. "You didn't have to risk yourself for me," she said, her voice steady despite the lingering adrenaline. He shook his head slightly. "I couldn't just watch, someone had to act." His eyes met hers, sincere and calm. "You were in danger, it was the right thing to do." She studied him, noting the combination of strength and gentleness, the balance between action and thought, and the quiet confidence that came from years of living close to the land. In that moment, something shifted. She felt a connection, a recognition that this man was trustworthy, capable, and different from anyone she had encountered before. The events of the morning had brought them together under extraordinary circumstances, creating a bond that would influence the next steps of their journey. The sun continued to climb, casting long shadows across the landscape. The threat had passed for now, but both knew the world could be dangerous. The rancher suggested they move toward the safety of his land, where they could rest and plan their next steps. She agreed, trusting him instinctively, aware that he had proven himself in action and judgment. Together, they made their way back through the trails, careful but calm, each step reinforcing a growing understanding between them. By the time they reached the edge of the ranch, the tension of the morning had eased, replaced by a sense of relief and cautious optimism. The woman observed the ranch and its orderly layout, noting the care with which the rancher had built his life. The land was expansive but well-tended, reflecting not just skill but a deep respect for the environment. The rancher guided her toward a quiet spot near the barn, ensuring the animals were secure and the area safe from prying eyes. Sitting together, catching their breath, the woman finally spoke. "I don't know how to thank you properly," she said, her voice tinged with admiration. He smiled lightly, brushing a hand through his dusty hair. "No thanks needed," he said simply. "Just take care of yourself." And in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. The woman had been rescued, but something more profound had begun. A connection forged in danger, courage, and trust, setting the stage for a story that neither of them could yet fully imagine. After the harrowing encounter with the gang, the Apache woman finally felt the relief of being safe. The rancher had led her to the quiet corners of his land, away from prying eyes and the chaos of the outside world. She could feel the tension slowly melting from her muscles, though her mind remained alert. Danger had a way of sharpening awareness, and she had learned over time that even in safety, caution was necessary. Yet in the calm of the ranch, she allowed herself a small measure of peace, something she rarely experienced on her own. The rancher, observing her quietly, knew the day's events had left their mark. He had seen fear, courage, and resilience in equal measure, and he respected her for it. He understood that after such a traumatic encounter, a person needed space to recover, but he also recognized the subtle signals of trust in her eyes. She had not run blindly, nor had she faltered entirely. She had relied on her instincts, her skill, and the brief but meaningful guidance he had offered. In that mix of strength and reliance, he saw something remarkable, a spirit that could endure hardship, yet was capable of forming a connection with someone else. They settled near the barn under the shade of a large oak tree, where the rancher had laid out a small supply of water and food. The woman hesitated at first, her hands lingering over the cup he offered, unsure whether to accept help. But after a few moments she took it, her fingers brushing his briefly. It was a small gesture, yet it carried a silent acknowledgement. She trusted him enough to accept the care he offered. The rancher gave a slight nod, understanding the significance of the moment without needing words. For several minutes they sat in silence. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns across the ground. The rancher watched the woman carefully, noting the tension in her posture, the way her eyes flicked toward the edges of the property, and the subtle signs of lingering alertness. He admired her resilience. She had faced life on her own, navigated difficult terrain, and survived situations that would have defeated many. Yet there was also vulnerability, a quiet recognition that even the strongest needed help sometimes. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "I've traveled many miles alone," she said. "I've faced dangers before, but this was different. I didn't expect anyone to come to my aid." The rancher smiled faintly, resting his hands on his knees. "I don't expect thanks," he said. "I just do what I know is right." Sometimes that means stepping in when someone is in danger. His gaze was steady, honest, and unwavering. It wasn't about heroics, it was about survival and doing what needed to be done. She studied him carefully. There was a quiet confidence in his demeanor, a balance between strength and humility that spoke louder than words. She had met men in her travels, some brave, some cruel, but few carried the combination of skill, calm judgment, and respect for others that this man possessed. She felt something shift within her, an appreciation that went beyond gratitude. He had saved her life, yes, but he had also shown integrity, patience, and thoughtfulness in the process. Over the next hours, they began to talk. Their conversation was careful at first, filled with practicalities, how she had been traveling, where she had come from, and what the gang had been planning. The rancher listened intently, asking questions with genuine interest, but never pressing too hard. He understood the importance of letting someone share their story at their own pace. In turn, she observed him closely, noting how he managed the ranch, his approach to the land, and the quiet way he interacted with the animals nearby. There was a rhythm to his life, a discipline that came from years of experience, yet it was not rigid or harsh. As the afternoon stretched on, the conversation began to shift. She spoke of her childhood, her family, and the lessons she had learned about survival and resilience. She told stories of moving through forests, crossing rivers, and finding shelter in unexpected places. He listened without interruption, impressed by her strength and independence. In response, he shared stories of ranch life, the challenges of weather, tending to animals, and the quiet satisfaction that came from a day's honest work. They discovered common ground in their respect for nature, the importance of self-reliance, and the understanding that life often demanded both courage and patience. Throughout their conversation, subtle gestures revealed growing trust. She offered him a piece of bread. He adjusted the water supply so she could drink easily, and they shared small smiles at moments of shared understanding. These actions, simple yet meaningful, built a bridge between them. Danger had forced them together, but it was their shared respect, curiosity, and patience that began to deepen the connection. Each looked at the other with a mixture of admiration and cautious curiosity, testing the waters of a bond forged under extraordinary circumstances. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden rays across the ranch, the woman felt a rare sense of comfort. She had learned to be self-reliant, to trust only herself, yet here was a man who had earned her trust through action, judgment, and care. She began to realize that strength was not only measured by physical ability, but also by the integrity, patience, and kindness one showed in moments of challenge. The rancher, in turn, recognized her resilience, her intelligence, and the quiet determination that allowed her to navigate life independently. They were two strong individuals, brought together by circumstance, yet beginning to appreciate the qualities they shared. That evening, they worked together to secure the ranch for the night. The woman helped tend the animals, moving with ease and skill, impressing the rancher with her agility and awareness. He guided her through the routines, explaining the tasks, and allowing her space to learn the rhythms of the ranch. There was a natural partnership forming, one built on cooperation and mutual respect. Small moments, a shared laugh at a clumsy horse, a glance exchanged over a bucket of water, added warmth to the growing connection. As night fell, the sky filled with stars, and the cool breeze carried the scent of the land. The rancher built a small fire, careful to keep it controlled, and they sat nearby, the flickering flames casting shadows across their faces. Silence settled between them, comfortable and natural, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The woman felt a rare sense of safety, a feeling she had not experienced in many months. She realized that danger had been part of life for her, but here, with this man, there was an element of trust and calm she had longed for. The rancher looked at her thoughtfully. "You've been through a lot today," he said softly. "You're stronger than most people I know, but even the strongest need a safe place sometimes." She met his gaze, recognizing the sincerity behind his words. "You saved me," she said quietly. "Not just from the gang, but from fear, from the feeling that no one can be trusted. You showed me that people like you exist." Her voice carried a mixture of gratitude, respect, and something deeper she had not yet named. They shared a quiet meal, the firelight flickering across the ranch, and talked long into the night. Stories of their lives, experiences, and hopes flowed naturally. She spoke of her dreams, of places she had wanted to see, of lessons learned from her people and the land. He shared his perspective on living simply yet fully, of understanding the balance between human life and the natural world. Each story deepened their understanding of the other, revealing layers of character, resilience, and shared values. By the time they prepared to sleep, there was a mutual recognition that their connection had grown beyond the immediate circumstances of the rescue. Trust had been established, respect had been earned, and an unspoken bond was forming. They were cautious, aware that the world outside remained dangerous, but there was a growing sense of partnership, a recognition that together they were stronger than alone. In the quiet of the night, as the ranch lay under the canopy of stars, the woman reflected on the day's events. She had faced danger, fought to survive, and been saved by a man she barely knew. Yet in his actions, she had found integrity, strength, and kindness. Something had shifted within her, a recognition that this man was not just a rescuer, but someone capable of trust, protection, and perhaps even companionship. The rancher, meanwhile, sat near the fire, listening to the night sounds of the land. He thought about the woman and her resilience, her intelligence, and her courage. He understood the rarity of such a person, someone who could navigate the challenges of life with skill and grace. He also recognized the bond forming between them, built not on circumstance alone, but on mutual respect and understanding. As the fire burned low, they retired to separate corners of the barn, each carrying the events of the day in their thoughts. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of the day's danger, but also with a quiet hope for what might come. The foundation of trust and connection had been laid, and in the safety of the ranch, a partnership began to grow, a partnership that neither had anticipated but both felt with quiet certainty. The next morning they woke to the soft light of dawn, the ranch alive with the sounds of animals and the rustle of the wind through the trees. The woman stretched, feeling stronger, more grounded. She looked at the rancher, who was already tending to the cattle, and a sense of admiration and respect filled her heart. They had faced danger together, and now they were beginning to navigate life side by side, learning from each other and understanding the value of trust and shared strength. The bond between them had been forged in fire, tempered by courage, and strengthened by mutual respect. It was a bond that would guide the next chapter of their story, a story of partnership, resilience, and the quiet power of two people brought together under extraordinary circumstances. The morning sun spilled gently over the ranch, warming the earth and casting a golden glow across the fields. The Apache woman rose early, her mind still full of thoughts from the previous day. The events of the past hours, the danger, the escape, and the quiet moments of trust had left a lasting impression on her. She had faced challenges before, but none like this, and none had changed her perspective so profoundly. The rancher was already outside, tending to the horses and the cattle, moving with the same calm confidence she had come to admire. She watched him for a moment, noting the way he worked with care, adjusting the saddles, feeding the animals, and moving through the ranch as if every step were deliberate and meaningful. There was something about the way he interacted with the land and the creatures under his care that was almost poetic. She felt a growing warmth in her chest, a feeling she had rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. Admiration, yes, but also a sense of connection that went deeper than respect. She realized slowly that she trusted him completely, perhaps more than she had trusted anyone else in years. The rancher noticed her watching and smiled lightly. "Didn't mean to distract you," he said, his voice steady but warm. "The animals are hungry and the morning is best for tending them." She smiled back, feeling a rare comfort in his presence. "It's okay," she said softly. "I was just admiring how you do everything with such care. It's impressive." He nodded, humility and pride mixing naturally in his expression. "It's a rhythm, something you get used to. The land teaches you patience and attention. Every animal, every plant, every task matters if you want things to go smoothly." The woman thought about her own experiences, how her people had taught her similar lessons about respecting the land and living in harmony with it. She saw now that while her life had been shaped by survival and independence, this man had built his life on discipline, compassion, and integrity. In him, she recognized a rare combination of strength and gentleness, the kind of person who could provide not just protection but partnership. They worked side by side through the morning, tending to the animals and preparing the ranch for the day. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on lighter topics now: favorite foods, the beauty of the land, and shared experiences of learning skills from older generations. Laughter came naturally, the tension of the past days gradually giving way to comfort and familiarity. The woman noticed how thoughtful he was in his actions, always considering the animals, the land, and even her needs. She felt a growing admiration for him, and it was accompanied by a stirring feeling she had not expected. Something like love, though it was new, unfamiliar, and powerful. By midday, the rancher suggested they rest under the shade of a large oak tree near the creek. The woman agreed, and they settled comfortably on the soft grass. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying the sweet scent of wildflowers and the faint hum of bees. It was peaceful, almost serene, yet the bond between them was electric in its quiet intensity. They spoke of future plans, her desire to travel safely, his hope to maintain the ranch, and how they could help each other. In the midst of practical conversation, there were glances and smiles that carried unspoken meaning, gestures that spoke of growing affection and trust. The woman finally found the courage to voice what had been on her mind. "I've always traveled alone," she said, her voice calm but tinged with emotion. "I've relied only on myself, and I've believed that was enough. But now, after everything, I realize how valuable it is to have someone you can trust, someone who will stand by you no matter what." The rancher looked at her with quiet intensity. "You've always been strong," he said, "but strength isn't just about surviving alone. It's also about knowing when to accept help, when to rely on someone else, and when to share your life with someone who respects you." Her heart beat faster, a rush of warmth spreading through her chest. The words, simple yet sincere, struck a chord. She realized that her admiration had deepened into something more profound. She had always been independent, but now she felt a desire for connection, for partnership, for someone she could rely on not just for protection but for companionship and love. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the two continued their work and conversation. The rancher showed her how to check the water troughs properly, how to guide the cattle calmly, and how to care for the horses without startling them. She followed his instructions attentively, her respect for his knowledge growing with every action. He, in turn, noticed her adaptability, intelligence, and keen observation skills. She was a quick learner, but more importantly, she had a natural intuition that complemented his methodical approach. Together, they moved through the ranch like a seamless team, each step reinforcing the bond forming between them. When evening approached, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold, the rancher suggested they sit by the edge of the creek and watch the sunset. They placed a few logs near the water, and the woman settled beside him. The air was cool and calm, carrying the scent of the river and the distant mountains. For a moment, there was no need for words. The beauty of the landscape, the quiet of the land, and the shared sense of survival and connection filled the space between them. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft and steady, yet carrying an emotion she could no longer contain. "You saved my life," she said, "and you've shown me something I didn't think I could feel again, safety, trust, and something else." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know how to explain it, but you mean more to me than I expected. More than I've ever allowed anyone to mean." The rancher turned to her, his expression calm but filled with warmth. "I don't know what the future holds," he said gently, "but I know that today and the events that brought us together have shown me that trust and care matter more than anything else. I respect you, and I value the person you are. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Her eyes met his, wide with realization and emotion. In that moment, the weight of the past dangers, the adrenaline of the rescue, and the quiet moments of bonding culminated in a single, undeniable truth. She had found someone she could trust completely, someone whose strength and kindness matched her own spirit. Without hesitation, she spoke the words that had been forming in her heart for hours, days, or perhaps a lifetime. "You're my husband now." The rancher blinked, momentarily surprised by the declaration. He had expected gratitude, respect, perhaps admiration, but not this bold, heartfelt statement. And yet in her eyes he saw sincerity, trust, and a deep understanding of the bond they had forged. He realized that her words were not impulsive, but a recognition of the connection, respect, and shared courage that had developed between them. For a long moment, he remained silent, processing the significance of her declaration. Then, with a quiet smile, he nodded. "If that is what you wish," he said softly, "then I will honor it. I will stand by you, protect you, and face whatever comes with you. We will build our lives together." Relief, joy, and a quiet exhilaration washed over her. She smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. The danger, the fear, the struggles, they had all led to this moment where trust and love had blossomed amidst hardship. The rancher offered his hand, and she took it without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined, and in that simple touch lay the promise of partnership, respect, and shared life. The days that followed were filled with a new rhythm. They worked side by side on the ranch, managing the animals, repairing fences, and tending the land. The Apache woman proved herself a capable partner, her skills, intuition, and resilience blending perfectly with the rancher's knowledge and strength. They shared tasks, laughed together, and supported one another through every small challenge. Each day deepened their bond, and each evening brought quiet moments of reflection, gratitude, and growing affection. The woman's respect for the rancher grew with every passing day. She observed the care with which he treated the animals, the patience he showed when teaching her new tasks, and the quiet leadership he exhibited over the land. In turn, The rancher admired her intelligence, adaptability, and the grace with which she navigated the world. Their relationship was built not just on survival or attraction, but on trust, shared values, and the recognition of each other's strengths. Over time, the surrounding community began to notice their partnership. Neighbors saw the woman assisting on the ranch, her confidence and skill evident in every task she undertook. The rancher, respected for his integrity and courage, became even more admired as people saw the genuine partnership forming between the two. Word spread not of drama or sensational events, but of a bond forged through trust, respect, and mutual support. A partnership that inspired others to recognize the importance of connection, understanding, and loyalty. The woman reflected often on the events that had brought them together, the sudden danger, the unexpected rescue, and the quiet moments of bonding that had followed. She understood that life was unpredictable, that hardships could arrive without warning, and that courage alone was not always enough. But she also recognized the extraordinary power of trust, partnership, and the willingness to care for another. In the rancher, she had found not just a protector, but a companion, a teacher, and a partner in life. As months passed, they continued to build their life together. The ranch became more than just a home or a workplace. It was a place of growth, learning, and shared dreams. The woman brought knowledge from her heritage, her skills, and her experiences, enhancing the ranch's life. The rancher shared his wisdom, his strength, and his understanding of the land. Together, they navigated challenges, celebrated successes, and faced each day as partners. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with fiery hues, the woman stood beside the rancher, looking out over the fields. "I never imagined life could be like this," she said softly. "I never thought I could feel safe, respected, and loved." The rancher placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. "Life has a way of bringing people together in unexpected ways," he said. "We've faced danger, we've learned to trust each other, and now we have a future to build together. That is something rare and worth holding on to." She smiled, feeling the truth of his words in her heart. The events of the past had been terrifying, but they had led to a life richer than she had ever imagined. Danger had introduced them, courage had connected them, and trust had bound them. In each other they had found a partnership that was stronger than fear, deeper than gratitude, and as steady as the land they worked upon. And so, under the vast sky and the gentle light of the setting sun, their story continued, not just of survival, but of love, trust, and the extraordinary bond that had formed between a rancher and an Apache woman. Together they faced the world, ready for whatever challenges came next, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other a partner, a companion, and a life shared in courage, respect, and unwavering trust.